The Lottery Ticket by Anton Chekhov is a short story that explores human nature, greed, and the fragility of happiness. Once upon a time, in a cozy little home, Ivan Dmitrich and his wife sat comfortably on their couch after dinner. They lived an ordinary life, nothing too grand or extravagant, but they were content with their routine and modest lifestyle. As Ivan stretched out and picked up a newspaper, something caught his eye. His wife had bought a lottery ticket some time ago, and the draw was about to be announced. With a grin, he glanced at her and jokingly said, "Well, suppose we really did win." His wife, Masha, laughed lightly. What would be the point in dreaming? But the playful thought began to stir something inside her. She had the ticket, after all, and as small as the odds were, there was a chance they could win. "Let's check the numbers," Ivan said, grabbing the newspaper more eagerly. Masha, now caught up in the excitement of the moment, hurried to fetch the ticket. They both sat down side by side, their hearts beating a little faster as Ivan read the numbers aloud. As he came to the series printed on the ticket, their eyes widened in disbelief. Wait, our series matches," Ivan exclaimed, his voice quivering with excitement. They both leaned in closer to inspect the ticket. Could this be happening? Could their lives be about to change? Suddenly, their minds raced ahead to all the things they could do with the money. "Just imagine," Ivan began, his voice now filled with wonder. "We could buy a huge estate, get out of this cramped house, and never have to worry about money again." His wife, equally swept up in the fantasy, chimed in, "We could travel the world, visit Paris, Italy. Oh, think of the dresses I could buy, the jewels." As the possibilities began to unravel, Ivan's thoughts turned darker. He imagined himself on his estate, living in luxury, and suddenly he saw his wife as an obstacle. "She'd want to spend all the money," he thought bitterly. "She'd drag me off on ridiculous trips and squander everything. I wouldn't have a moment's peace." Masha, too, began to imagine what might happen. "Ivan will want to hoard the money," she thought. "He'll keep everything for himself, and I'll never get to enjoy the life I've always dreamed of." In their heads, what had started as a thrilling possibility had turned into something sour. They began to resent each other for how they imagined the money would change their lives. The house, once warm and comfortable, now felt too small and stifling. The quiet, contented couple had been replaced by two strangers, consumed by greed and mistrust. Finally, he even reached the last number on the ticket. His hands were trembling as he looked at the newspaper again. The number didn't match. There was no fortune. There was no grand estate, no trips abroad, no extravagant jewels or fancy cars. They had won nothing. Silence filled the room as the realization settled in. The fantasies dissolved as quickly as they had appeared, and with them, the tension that had grown between Ivan and Masha. They looked at each other, their faces still tense from the moment of hope and disappointment. But something had changed. The room felt colder. The comfort they once shared seemed distant. Though no words were spoken, the seeds of distrust and resentment that had sprouted in those few moments lingered in the air, like a shadow over their ordinary life. Ivan crumpled the newspaper and tossed it aside, muttering something under his breath. Masha sat quietly, folding the lottery ticket and putting it away, as if the whole episode had been nothing more than a fleeting dream. Yet the damage was done. In the brief time they believed in their luck, their hearts had shown them something deeper, something unsettling about their own nature, about the fragility of happiness, and how easily it can be shaken by greed and ambition. And so, they returned to their ordinary life. But it was no longer the same. The lottery ticket had not given them wealth, but it had revealed a bitter truth, that even the smallest glimpse of fortune could change everything. The Bet by Anton Chekhov is a gripping short story that delves into the value of human life, the corrupting nature of greed, and the search for meaning. Once, many years ago, in the luxurious drawing room of a wealthy banker, a heated debate was taking place among a group of men. They were deep in conversation about crime, punishment, and justice. The question at hand was this, which is more humane, the death penalty or life imprisonment. The banker, a man of immense wealth and power, argued passionately in favor of the death penalty. "It's better to die quickly than to rot away in a cell for years, deprived of freedom and the joys of life," he declared, his voice confident. But one young lawyer, not yet 30, disagreed. "No," he said, his voice steady but determined. "Life imprisonment is better than death. To live, even if imprisoned, is always better than dying." The banker, who was hot-blooded and prone to rash decisions, scoffed at the young man's idealism. "Nonsense," he exclaimed. "If you think so, let's put it to the test. I'll bet you 2 million rubles that you won't last 5 years in voluntary solitary confinement. You'll beg to be released before then." The lawyer, full of youthful conviction and pride, responded without hesitation. "I'll take your bet, but I won't stay for 5 years. I'll stay for 15 and prove to you that life in any form is worth living." The room fell silent. The stakes were high, but the challenge was set. The banker, driven by the thrill of the wager, agreed, and the terms were written down. The lawyer would spend 15 years in solitary confinement with no human contact, but he could have access to books, music, wine, and letters. If he succeeded, the banker would pay him 2 million rubles, a fortune that could change a man's life. So, the lawyer was locked away in a small, isolated lodge on the banker's estate. At first, the days and nights seemed endless, but the lawyer remained steadfast. In the first year, he asked for books on light subjects, novels, plays, and stories that would distract him from his loneliness. He played the piano and indulged in wine. He kept his mind occupied, clinging to his desire to win the bet. In the second year, his tastes changed. He requested nothing but the classics: philosophy, poetry, and history. He began to devour knowledge, immersing himself in the thoughts of the greatest minds, seeking meaning and understanding. By the 5th year, the lawyer's spirit seemed to change again. He no longer sought distractions or entertainment. His letters to the outside world became shorter, more distant, and fewer in number. He asked only for religious texts, the Bible, theology, and other spiritual works. He began to search for answers beyond the earthly realm, grappling with questions of existence and faith. Time went on, and as the years passed, the banker, who had once been so wealthy, found himself in financial trouble. Bad investments and reckless spending had drained his fortune, and the prospect of losing 2 million rubles filled him with dread. If the lawyer succeeded in his bet, it would ruin the banker. He began to hate the very idea of the bet, cursing the foolishness of his younger self. As the 15th year approached, the banker's fear grew into desperation. He knew that he would be ruined if the lawyer emerged from his solitary confinement and claimed the prize. In the dark of the night, consumed by greed and fear, the banker devised a terrible plan. "I'll kill him," the banker whispered to himself. "It's the only way. No one will suspect me. He's been forgotten by the world, locked away in solitude for 15 years. If he dies, I will be free of this burden." On the eve of the final day, the banker crept silently to the lodge where the lawyer had spent the last 15 years. He unlocked the door and stepped inside, a knife hidden in his coat. But as he entered the small, dimly lit room, he was struck by what he saw. The lawyer, now gaunt and withered, sat at a table surrounded by books. His hair had grown long, his face pale and thin, but there was a strange peace about him. On the table before him was a letter written in a shaky hand. The banker, his heart pounding, leaned in to read it. In the letter, the lawyer revealed something profound. After 15 years of solitude and intense study, he had come to a realization. "I despise your wealth in the world," the lawyer wrote. "I have discovered that life's pleasures, money, fame, power, are worthless, fleeting, and empty. In these years, I have learned the true meaning of life, and it is not in riches or luxury. I renounce the 2 million rubles that I once so desperately desired." The lawyer went on to explain that he no longer wanted anything from the world. He had found peace in solitude, knowledge, and spiritual enlightenment. He would leave his confinement before the agreed-upon time, not because he was defeated, but because he no longer cared for the prize. The bet, for him, had become meaningless. The banker, trembling with emotion, dropped the knife. He felt a wave of shame wash over him. The lawyer had given up everything for a higher understanding, while he, the banker, had been consumed by greed and fear. He quietly left the room, locking the door behind him. The next morning, just hours before the bet was to end, the banker learned that the lawyer had kept his word. He had walked away from the lodge, leaving behind his books and the prize money he once sought. The banker, though relieved, felt no triumph. He had won the bet, But at what cost? His soul had been corrupted by greed, and the lawyer had shown him a deeper truth, a truth that would haunt him for the rest of his days. And so the story of the bet ends not with victory, but with a profound reflection on the human condition. The lawyer had gained wisdom, and the banker, though richer, was left impoverished in spirit. The bet, in the end, revealed the emptiness of material wealth and the fragile nature of human ambition. Kashtanka by Anton Chekhov is a touching story about a little dog who finds herself lost, taken in by a kind stranger, and torn between her old life and new experiences. Once upon a time, there was a little reddish-brown dog named Kashtanka, a scrappy little mutt who lived in a bustling city. She belonged to Luka Alexandrovich, a carpenter, and his son, Fedyushka. Life was simple but hard. Luka wasn't the most loving master. He often shouted and scolded Kashtanka, and sometimes gave her a little kick if she got underfoot. But to Kashtanka, this was home. She was used to the smell of sawdust, the clanking of tools, and the long days by Luka's side. One cold winter evening, Luka took Kashtanka with him into town on an errand. The streets were crowded, filled with noise and movement. People rushed by, carts clattered over the cobblestones, and the smell of baked bread and roasting chestnuts filled the air. Kashtanka tried to stay close to Luka, weaving through the legs of the pedestrians, but the noise and confusion overwhelmed her. Suddenly, there was a loud noise, a trumpet blaring, a man shouting, and Kashtanka, startled, darted away in panic. She ran and ran, not knowing where she was going, until the sounds of the city faded behind her. When she finally stopped, panting and confused, she realized she had lost her master. Kashtanka wandered the streets alone, hungry and frightened. She barked at passers-by, hoping someone might recognize her or take pity on her, but no one paid attention to the little stray. She curled up under a doorway for warmth, feeling utterly lost and lonely. As night fell and snow began to drift through the streets, a man noticed the shivering dog. He was a kind older man with spectacles and a warm smile. Seeing Kashtanka in such a pitiful state, he spoke to her in a gentle voice and coaxed her to follow him. Weak and cold, Kashtanka followed him gratefully, not knowing where else to go. The man took Kashtanka to his cozy home where he offered her food and shelter. The warmth of the house, the soft bed, and the kindness of this stranger were new to Kashtanka. She had never experienced such tenderness before. The man petted her and gave her a new name, Auntie. Life suddenly seemed peaceful and comfortable. As Kashtanka adjusted to her new home, she discovered that the man wasn't just any ordinary person. He was a circus performer. His house was filled with strange animals, including a goose named Ivan Ivanich, a cat called Fedyusha, and a pig named Kavronya Ivanovna. All of them performed in the circus, and soon Kashtanka, or Auntie as she was now called, was being trained to do tricks too. At first, she didn't understand what was happening. The routines were strange and confusing, but the man was kind and patient. He never shouted or scolded her, and unlike her former master, he treated her with care. Slowly, she began to learn. She could walk on her hind legs, jump through hoops, and even bark on command. The audience loved her during her first performance, and she began to feel a sense of pride in her new role. But still, something tugged at Kashtanka's heart. She missed her old life, the familiar smells of sawdust and glue, and even the scolding voice of Luka Alexandrovich. Though her new life was comfortable, there was a part of her that still longed for the past. One day, everything changed. The circus was preparing for a big performance, and Kashtanka was set to perform alongside her fellow animals. The audience was buzzing with excitement as the show began. But then, from the crowd, Kashtanka heard a familiar voice. Kashtanka! Kashtanka! It was Luka Alexandrovich, her old master. He had come to the circus and recognized her immediately. Kashtanka froze, torn between the two worlds, her old life with Luka and Fedyushka, and her new life with the kind circus performer. Without hesitation, she ran toward her old master, tail wagging wildly. She licked his hands and barked joyfully, overwhelmed with excitement. Luka, surprised and delighted to see his little dog again, scooped her up in his arms. The circus performer, seeing this reunion, smiled sadly but understandingly. He knew that Kashtanka belonged with her old family, even if her new life had been kind to her. And so, Kashtanka returned to her old home, where life continued as it had before. Luka still scolded and shouted, but to Kashtanka, this was where she truly belonged. The brief adventure in the circus had shown her a different kind of life, but in the end, it was her loyalty to her old master that won out. Though Kashtanka's life was simple and hard, she was content. For to a dog, there is no greater joy than returning to the ones they love, no matter what their life may look like. Kashtanka is a story about loyalty, the pull of the familiar, and the bond between a pet and its master. It reminds us that even in the most unexpected of adventures, sometimes home is where we truly find our happiness. Anton Chekhov's short story, The Chameleon, is a biting satire of authority, hypocrisy, and social hierarchies. On a crisp autumn day, the town square was busy with the usual hum of activity. Shopkeepers bustled in and out of their stores, vendors called out to potential buyers, and townsfolk went about their business. Amid this scene of everyday life, a commotion suddenly arose near a small fruit stall. A yelping sound pierced the air, drawing the attention of everyone nearby. A crowd quickly formed around the source of the noise, where a little dog stood barking frantically. Nearby, a man, Ryukin, a goldsmith, was clutching his bleeding finger, wincing in exaggerated pain. He waved his injured hand in the air, attracting the concern of the crowd. "It bit me," Ryukin shouted, pointing an accusing finger at the little dog. The crowd murmured in response, curious and indignant. "I was just minding my own business, walking through the square, and this mutt came out of nowhere and bit me for no reason." Just then, Ochumyalov, the local police inspector, appeared. A stout man with a heavy, self-important demeanor, Ochumyalov made his way through the gathering crowd, swinging his cane in hand. His bright, shiny uniform gleamed in the autumn sunlight, and his sharp eyes scanned the scene with authority. "What's going on here?" Ochumyalov demanded, looking around. "Why is there a crowd?" "It's this dog, Your Honor," Ryukin said, still holding his finger and grimacing. "It bit me for no reason. Look at my finger. It's bleeding." Ochumyalov peered down at the small dog, a scrawny creature with patches of fur missing, and then back at Ryukin. "Aha!" he said, raising his cane as if to make an official pronouncement. "So the dog bit you, did it? Well, we'll soon find out whose dog this is, and they'll be made to answer for it." The crowd leaned in closer, eager to see what would happen next. Some nodded in agreement with Ochumyalov, murmuring about the danger of loose dogs in the town square. But then, just as Ochumyalov was about to make his ruling, someone in the crowd spoke up. "Wait a minute," a man said thoughtfully. "That dog, it looks like it belongs to General Zhigilov." At the mention of the general, Ochumyalov's entire demeanor shifted. He straightened up, his face softening, and he looked at the dog again. "Is that so?" "General Zhigilov's dog, you say?" Suddenly, Ochumyalov's tone changed. "Well, if it's the general's dog, there must be some misunderstanding," he said smoothly. "Perhaps the dog didn't bite Ryukin intentionally. You know how dogs can be, playful creatures. It probably just nipped him as a joke, didn't mean any harm." The crowd, sensing the change in Ochumyalov's attitude, began to murmur again, but this time with less outrage. Ryukin, who had been ready to demand punishment for the dog's owner, was taken aback. "But, Your Honor," he stammered, "it bit me. My finger is bleeding." Ochumyalov shrugged casually. "Well, accidents happen. No need to make a fuss. You probably provoked the dog without realizing it." But before Ryukin could protest further, another man from the crowd spoke up. "Actually, now that I think about it, I'm not sure if it really is General Zhigilov's dog. It might belong to someone else." At this, Ochumyalov's face darkened again. "Not the general's dog, you say? Well, in that case, this is a serious offense." He swung his cane back down and glared at the dog. "A stray dog running loose in the square, biting people. We can't allow that." Ochumyalov turned back to Ryukin, his voice booming. "We'll have to teach this dog's owner a lesson, a fine, or maybe even jail time. This sort of behavior is unacceptable." The crowd, seeing Ochumyalov's shift back to his earlier sternness, nodded in agreement again. Ryukin, now emboldened by the inspector's words, straightened up and puffed out his chest. "Yes, Your Honor. The owner must be held responsible." But just as the situation seemed to be settled, yet another voice from the crowd spoke up. "Actually, wait. Now that I get a closer look, I'm certain that it is the general's dog after all." At this, Ochumyalov stopped in his tracks. His face went pale, and he turned once more to the dog, his expression softening immediately. "The general's dog," he said, forcing a smile. "Well then, that changes things entirely. Of course, if it belongs to the general, there's been some mistake. Dogs of that caliber don't just go around biting people." He bent down slightly to examine the dog more closely, his voice now gentle. "Look at it, such a fine little animal. It wouldn't harm a fly." Ryukin must have been mistaken. Perhaps he frightened the dog with his big hands, and it reacted defensively. Ryukin's mouth fell open in shock. "But your honor, my finger, my injury." Chameleon waved his hand dismissively. "Oh, nonsense. It's a small scratch. No need to make a scene over it. You should be grateful you weren't injured more seriously." And so with that, Ochumyelov turned on his heel, his cane tapping the cobblestones as he walked away, leaving the crowd behind. The little dog trotted off, seemingly unaware of the chaos it had caused, while Ryukin stood there, still clutching his bleeding finger, dumbfounded by the rapid turn of events. As the crowd dispersed, they couldn't help but chuckle quietly to themselves. The townsfolk had seen Ochumyelov's behavior change like a chameleon, shifting with the perception of who the dog belonged to, his sternness fading to kindness when power was involved. The chameleon exposes the fickleness of authority figures like Ochumyelov, who change their stance based on social status and self-interest. Chekhov's sharp wit shines through, highlighting the absurdity and hypocrisy of such behavior.